is the book I'm now releasing. It's the one I've worked on the longest of all books that I've worked on. In fact, you can go to tour.com, my publisher site, and look around for a post that I did on Tuesday, where I posted a screen capture. Actually, it was a photograph I took with my phone. My very first manuscript that I started writing when I was 15. And in that manuscript was one of the characters who eventually, 20 years later, ended up in The Way of Kings. So these ideas have been kicking around in my head forever. Of course, that character has grown and transformed and changed. But it was really amusing to me because I'd forgotten that character started in that first book, that I started reading when you're bright-eyed as a teenager. And I just discovered fantasy novels just less than a year before. And I finally discovered something that was me, something that I was just, something that I could do. And I saw this, I thought, this is what I want to do. And so I started writing my own. It was a terrible book. It's awful. You go read that page. It's just dreadful. It's like an unintentional bad dragon that's fanfic. It's really what it is. But in that is that seed. There's this character. I want to tell a story. One of the things that always has fascinated me is when the concept of someone who is really morally a good person is forced to do something that doesn't look good. When good people are put in bad situations, and then when bad people, quote unquote, are put into situations where they're doing things that actually might be for the good. And there was this idea I had for a character, a man who, early in the book, and this happened both in the early work that I wrote when I was 14, and it now happens as the prologue of this book, loses his brother. His brother is assassinated. His brother is murdered. And this man is the brother of the king. The king is assassinated, and his brother then was not there to protect and save him. And it enters this interesting dynamic because there is an heir. There's a young man who's to be the king and to inherit it. Now our protagonist is his name is Dalinar. Dalinar is his uncle. But the king, the young man, isn't a particularly good king. He's not a terrible one either, but he's not a particularly good one. And why I like this is something that this kind of book deals with. It just kind of, it isn't the main core of the story. It's one of the seeds. It's about this man who is the uncle of the king and knows he can do a better job and knows the kingdom would be better off if he were king. And yet, taking rule away from his nephew is a bad thing to do. It's the wrong thing. You don't overthrow the government. You certainly don't take it from the nephew that you love, the rule of the government. And yet, you see how this puts people in these good people in interesting kind of conflicted, twist your insides about problems, because every time the nephew makes a big mistake and is too weak to lead the country in the right way, Dalinar's here put in this situation of, well, I can try and help you be better. I can try and teach you to be better, but if I were in control, the kingdom and the people would be better off. And what kind of choices you make in those situations. And that seed was the thing in that first book that I didn't even know what I was doing, that expanded and grew larger and became this great this character who eventually ended up in one book, and then I rewrote that book, and then I rewrote that book, and I threw that book away, and I wrote it again from scratch. I never thought that I would be able to get away with publishing this book, or I thought maybe eventually in my career, because at that time I was conceiving this book that had these many illustrations. In fact, I actually took an illustration class in college. I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want to be embarrassed in front of those two gentlemen who ended up doing the art of the book. But I took an illustrating class, and I actually did illustrations for The Way of Kings way back in 2002 or 2001. I never showed those to you then. What's that? Yeah, Gabby wants to see them. I actually did. At that point, I was actually planning an appendix, an illustrated appendix for the novel that would show all the plants and creatures and things. And we eventually ended up, instead of doing that, I got the idea of actually putting in pages from one of the characters' sketchbook, because she's an artist and a natural historian, and so she's sketching these creatures and making notes about them and things as she travels, and I included them in pages of the book. So I didn't know if the publisher would ever let me get away with something like that. that. I knew it was going to be an enormous book. I really, really wanted Michael Wade on the cover. There are all these things that I wanted for the book, but I knew I would never be able to get unless my profile of the publisher was raised dramatically. And then in 2007, something very dramatic happened in my career. I was called unexpectedly on the phone by Robert Jordan's widow. I hadn't applied for this, I didn't know I was in the running, and she asked me if I would complete The Wheel of Time, which I had loved and read since I was a teenager. And so my career changed courses, and then about after I turned in the first Wheel of Time books, the publisher called me and said, you know what I'd really like from you? I'd really like a Brandon Sanderson solo book for 2010. I'd really like it to be the start of a big series.